In the popular imagination, the period following the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE plunged Europe into centuries of ignorance, superstition, and cultural regression. We call it the Dark Ages, a time when knowledge vanished, progress halted, and civilization itself seemed to retreat. But what if this narrative, so deeply embedded in our collective understanding, is fundamentally wrong? The misconception begins with the term itself. Dark Ages was coined during the Renaissance by scholars like Petrarch, who viewed their own era as a revival of classical learning after a prolonged period of darkness. This characterization served their narrative of cultural rebirth, but severely distorted historical reality. In truth, the period from roughly 500 to 1000 CE was anything but dark. Consider the monastic scriptoria of early medieval Europe, where monks painstakingly preserved classical knowledge. At Lindisfarne Priory off the Northumbrian coast in the 8th century, monks produced illuminated manuscripts of extraordinary beauty and sophistication, including the famous Lindisfarne Gospels completed around 715 CE. These works required advanced knowledge of chemistry to create pigments, sophisticated artistic techniques, and mastery of Latin, hardly the products of an ignorant, unlearned society. The Venerable Bede, working at the monastery of Jarrow in northern England in the early 8th century, wrote The Ecclesiastical History of the English People around 731 CE, a work so methodologically sound that it would not be out of place in modern historical practice. Bede carefully cited his sources, distinguished between first-hand and second-hand accounts, and approached chronology with remarkable precision. Many assume this was an era of technological stagnation, explains Dr. Arthur Edgeworth, medieval technology historian at Oxford University. Yet the period witnessed remarkable innovations that transformed European society. Take the heavy plow, introduced around the 6th century, which allowed farmers to cultivate the dense, clay-rich soils of northern Europe for the first time. This single innovation dramatically increased food production across the continent, supporting larger populations and enabling specialization beyond subsistence agriculture. The watermill, though invented in antiquity, spread extensively during this period. By the time of the Domesday Book in 1086 CE, over 5,600 watermills were recorded in England alone. These mills mechanized grain grinding, cloth fulling, and various industrial processes, representing a significant application of non-human energy to production. Horseshoes and the horse collar, both medieval innovations, revolutionized transportation and agriculture. The horse collar, which appeared in Europe during the 9th century, allowed horses to pull heavy loads without choking themselves, dramatically increasing the efficiency of plowing and transport. These advances were not trivial improvements, but fundamental technologies that shaped European development for centuries. In governance and law, Alfred the Great of Wessex, reigned 871 to 899 CE, compiled the first comprehensive law code in Anglo-Saxon England, synthesizing existing tribal laws with Christian principles. His legal innovations provided a foundation for later English common law. Alfred also reorganized the FYRD, militia, into a standing army and created a system of fortified towns across his kingdom, effectively checking Danish expansion in England. The notion that the collapse of Rome left Europe in political chaos misunderstands how new, functioning political systems emerged, argues Professor Winona Phillips, political historian at Cambridge. The Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne administered a vast territory with remarkable effectiveness given the constraints of medieval communication. When Charlemagne was crowned emperor by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day, 800 CE, he ruled a domain spanning much of Western Europe. His administration featured standardized coinage, regular assemblies of nobles and clergy to address governance issues, and missi dominici, royal officials sent to ensure local adherence to imperial decrees. The Carolingian Renaissance he sponsored revitalized learning, standardized handwriting, developing the Carolingian minuscule that influenced our modern lowercase alphabet, and preserved countless classical texts that might otherwise have been lost. Trade and commerce continued throughout this supposedly dark period. Archaeological discoveries of Islamic coins across Scandinavia and the Baltic reveal extensive trade networks. The famous parenthesis, proposed by historian Henri Perrin, argued that Mediterranean trade continued robustly until the Islamic conquests of the 7th century, challenging the notion that commerce collapsed with Rome. At Sutton Hoo in Suffolk, England, a ship burial from approximately 625 CE contained Byzantine silverware, Levantine textiles, and coins from Merovingian France, clear evidence of far-reaching trade connections. The grave goods of this Anglo-Saxon king or nobleman demonstrate not isolation but engagement with a wider world. One of the most pernicious myths is that medieval people were intellectually stagnant or superstitious compared to their classical or Renaissance counterparts, notes Professor Phillips. The evidence suggests otherwise. In the Islamic world, which formed a crucial part of the medieval Mediterranean sphere, scientific and philosophical inquiry flourished. At the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, founded by Caliph Harun al-Rashid around 790 CE and expanded by his son al-Mamun, scholars translated Greek philosophical and scientific works while making original contributions to mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and optics. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi, working in Baghdad in the early 9th century, wrote pivotal texts on algebra. Indeed, the word algebra derives from the Arabic al-jabr in his book title, and introduced Hindu-Arabic numerals to the Islamic world, eventually replacing cumbersome Roman numerals in Europe. The numerical system we use today, including the concept of zero, spread from India through the Islamic world before reaching Europe. In medicine, the Persian physician al-Razi, Rhazes, who lived from approximately 865 to 925 CE, wrote comprehensive medical texts distinguishing between measles and smallpox for the first time. Ibn Sina, Avicenna, whose Canon of Medicine, completed around 1025 CE, remained standard medical text in Europe until the 17th century, systematized existing medical knowledge while adding original observations on contagious diseases and experimental medicine. These intellectual achievements did not occur in isolation from Christian Europe. In Spain, where Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisted for centuries, the translation movement centered in Toledo in the 12th century transferred this knowledge to Latin Christendom, helping fuel the intellectual developments of the later Middle Ages. Even in Northern Europe, intellectual life continued in monastic centers. John Scotus Eriugena, working at the court of Charles the Bald around 850 CE, produced sophisticated Neoplatonic philosophical works and translations from Greek. The monastic school at St. Gall in Switzerland maintained a renowned library and produced important musical innovations, including early developments in musical notation. When we examine the material culture of the period, the Dark Age narrative becomes even less tenable, explains Dr. Edgeworth. Archaeological evidence reveals communities with sophisticated craft production and artistic achievements. The Sutton Hoo burial included a ceremonial helmet of extraordinary craftsmanship, featuring detailed decorative elements and sophisticated metalworking techniques. The intricate interlace patterns on stone crosses at Ruthwell and Bewcastle in northern England, created in the 8th century, demonstrate artistic sophistication and cultural confidence, not desperate cultural regression. The stereotype of medieval architectural crudeness compared to Roman precision dissolves when examining buildings like the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, completed in 537 CE under Emperor Justinian. Its massive dome spanning 31 meters and innovative pendentive design represented a revolutionary architectural achievement, solving complex engineering problems with elegant solutions. In Western Europe, pre-Romanesque churches like the Carolingian Chapel at Aachen, completed around 805 CE, or the Church of Germigny-des-Prés in France, built approximately 806 CE, show sophisticated architectural understanding, including complex vaulting techniques and deliberate classical references, hardly the work of builders who had forgotten Roman techniques. The term Dark Ages also obscures the remarkable cultural achievements of non-Mediterranean Europe during this period, notes Dr. Edgeworth. In Ireland, which had never been part of the Roman Empire, monastic scholars produced extraordinary works of art and literature. The Book of Kells, created around 800 CE, represents one of the most spectacular achievements of medieval art, with its densely decorated pages and intricate geometric patterns. Irish monasteries maintained classical learning while developing distinctive theological and philosophical traditions, and Irish missionaries played crucial roles in spreading Christianity and establishing monasteries throughout Europe. Anglo-Saxon England produced the epic poem Beowulf sometime between the 8th and early 11th centuries, a sophisticated literary work exploring themes of heroism, loyalty, and the human condition. Old English poetry featured complex alliterative patterns and kennings, metaphorical compound expressions, demonstrating linguistic and literary sophistication. Norse culture, often reduced to stereotypes of Viking raiders, produced the remarkable artistic achievements of the Oseberg ship burial, dated to 834 CE, including elaborately carved animal motifs and a wagon of exceptional craftsmanship. The Vikings' navigational abilities allowed them to reach North America around 1000 CE, establishing a brief settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, centuries before Columbus. Perhaps most importantly, the Dark Ages myth obscures the remarkable societal transformations that occurred during this period, explains Professor Phillips. Medieval Europe was not simply a degraded version of Rome, but a new civilization emerging from the synthesis of classical, Germanic, and Christian elements. The feudal system, which began to emerge in the 9th century, represented a pragmatic response to the security challenges of the era, providing a framework for military service and political authority. While often criticized by later observers, this system provided stability and protected vulnerable communities during turbulent times. Medieval innovations in agriculture, including the three-field crop rotation system that spread from the 8th century onward, significantly increased agricultural yields. This system allowed 1/3 of the land to lie fallow each year, replenishing soil nutrients, while still cultivating more land than earlier two-field systems. The medieval church, far from being solely a repressive institution, provided education, social services, and cultural continuity. Monasteries served as centers for agricultural innovation, manuscript production, and medical care. Religious orders like the Benedictines, formalized by Benedict of Nursia around 530 CE, created communities that preserved learning while developing new economic models combining self-sufficiency with regional exchange. The persistence of the Dark Ages myth in popular culture reveals more about modern biases than historical reality, argues Dr. Edgeworth. We tend to value certain kinds of technological and social developments while overlooking others. The Renaissance humanists who coined the term Dark Ages privileged classical learning and aesthetics, dismissing medieval achievements as crude or barbaric. Later Enlightenment thinkers emphasized rationality and scientific inquiry, viewing the medieval church as an impediment to progress rather than a preserver of knowledge. Industrial Revolution perspectives valued particular forms of technological development, overlooking medieval innovations in agriculture, construction, and energy use. Perhaps most troublingly, the Dark Ages narrative often contains implicit assumptions about civilization that deserve scrutiny, notes Professor Phillips. The idea that history follows a linear progression from darkness to light oversimplifies complex historical processes and often embeds problematic cultural hierarchies. The fall of Rome did not plunge Europe into centuries of ignorance. Instead, it initiated a period of cultural recombination and innovation that laid the foundations for later European achievements. The legal systems, technological innovations, artistic traditions, and intellectual frameworks developed during these supposedly dark centuries shaped European civilization for a millennium afterward. Modern perspectives are beginning to recognize the sophisticated nature of early medieval societies. New archaeological techniques reveal complex trading networks and material culture previously invisible to historians. Scholars re-examining early medieval texts find sophisticated intellectual traditions rather than superstition and ignorance. Digital humanities approaches allow researchers to map connections between medieval centers of learning, revealing networks of knowledge exchange spanning continents. For today's leaders and thinkers, recognizing the mischaracterization of the Dark Ages offers valuable lessons, concludes Dr. Edgeworth. It reminds us to question established narratives, especially those that confirm our preconceptions about progress and civilization. The early medieval period demonstrates how societies can adapt to massive systemic shocks, like the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, by developing new institutions and technologies suited to changed circumstances. Rather than seeing only decline, we can recognize resilience and innovation. The period's intellectual achievements remind us that knowledge preservation is a crucial cultural function, especially during times of transition. The monastic scribes who painstakingly copied classical texts preserved a cultural inheritance that might otherwise have vanished. Perhaps most importantly, recognizing the sophistication of supposedly primitive societies helps us overcome chronological snobbery, the assumption that people in the past were less intelligent or capable than ourselves. The men and women of early medieval Europe faced enormous challenges with creativity and resilience, developing solutions appropriate to their circumstances rather than simply failing to be modern. The next time someone dismisses the Dark Ages as a period of ignorance and superstition, remember the monks creating brilliant illuminated manuscripts, the engineers designing innovative water mills, the mathematicians developing algebra, and the rulers crafting new legal codes. Remember that what we think we know about history is often shaped by the biases of those who wrote it. The darkness was never in the age itself, but in our misunderstanding of it.